Hold on. Let me go back. Pardon me. It is not ordinarily realized that, of all the great mass of writing on race relations, there is available no consistent theory of race relations. The need for such a sociological explanation is so great that recently, when one author succeeded with some degree of superficial logic in explaining the phenomena in terms of caste relations, the college textbooks and social science journals almost unanimously and unquestionably hurriedly adopted his theory. Perhaps social and behavioral scientists have failed to develop a sound and consistent theory of racism because of their tendency to be less demanding and less stringently disciplined in sticking to observable and measurable data than the so-called physical science are required to be in formulating hypotheses. Frequently, contrary to all the basic premises of modern science, statements are made by some of those scientists a priori, that is to say, claimed as valid independent of observation. Similarly, society in general fails to impose a significant amount of pressure on behavioral and social scientists to yield viable theories and definitions. Such theories and definitions subsequently can stand and function as efficient and effective tools to be utilized by social engineers as guides for changing social reality. However, the contrary seems to be the case. If there is any pressure at all, it is to maintain the social status quo. And all too often, institutions of the society reward the superficial, inconsistent, and dysfunctional theories of societal dynamics. Neely Fuller, in his 1969 copyrighted The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook workbook for thought, speech, and/or actions for victims of racism, recognized the need for a functional statement on racism, one that could be utilized daily by those earnestly seeking to bring about social change. Fuller observed that, contrary to most present thinking, there is only one functioning racism in the known world: white supremacy. He challenges his readers to identify and then to demonstrate the superiority or functional supremacy of any of the world's non-white peoples over anyone. Concluding that since there is no operational supremacy of any colored people, Fuller reveals that the only valid operational definition of racism is white supremacy. He observes that in spite of any and all statements the world's non-white peoples may make about themselves having economic and/or political independence and the like, in the final analysis, they are all victims of white supremacy process. He places major emphasis on the present realities of the world that can be verified and tested rather than on what we could imagine to be the case, such as black or yellow supremacy. He further emphasizes that instead of focusing on individual cases or on specific locations, a perspective that examines the patterns of relationships between whites and non-whites worldwide must be developed. Fuller explains that racism is not merely a pattern of individual and/or institutional practice. It is a universally operating system of white supremacy and domination in which the majority of the world's white people participate. He discounts the validity of theories that recognize the evolution of economic systems as the origin of this state of affairs. Instead, he reveals the inadequate analysis of such theories by suggesting that various economic systems, such as capitalism, communism, and socialism, have been devised, used, and refined in an effort to achieve the primary goal of white domination. In other words, the goal of the white supremacy system is none other than the establishment, maintenance, expansion, and refinement of world domination by members of a group that classifies itself as the white race. Bombs. Fuller then suggests the word race in this sense has little biological validity, but is translated more correctly as organization, the sole purpose of which is to maintain white domination and white control. Okay? That is the doctrine of discovery. That is the papal bulls. That is manifest destiny. Fuller's emphasis on the concept of color amplifies the assertion made in 1903 by W.E.B. Du Bois, probably the greatest American social scientist, in The Souls of Black Folk, that the great problem facing the 20th century is that of the color line. Whether or not one is emotionally comfortable with Fuller's thesis and assessment is not germane. The question of such comfort never has been the important concern of scientific investigation. Of great significance in Fuller's work is the description of relationships between non-white and white peoples. Fuller defines and elucidates these relationships as a means of accounting for and illuminating many past and present observational social practices. Also, this examination reveals that despite all kinds of programs and pronouncements to the contrary for the past several hundred years, white supremacist social conditions have remained intact as the dominant social reality. Impressed that the concept of a system of white domination over the world's non-white peoples could explain the seeming predicament and dilemma of non-white social reality, I tended to focus as a psychiatrist on what possible motivational force, operative at both the individual and group levels, can account for the evolution of these patterns of social behavioral practice that apparently function in all areas of human activity. These are the human activities where this racism functions, family. Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And it is of my humble opinion, for everybody who is reluctant to elect entertainers and athletes as our new leaders and things of that nature, and that's cute and everything, but I don't even think that we could be having, let's cut it out with the clickbait. Let's stop saying that one of these niggas is the second coming and, somebody coming out of the locker room is going to save our people, because we need a Muhammad Ali in every single one of these systems. We need them in every single one of these industries. We don't need one either. We need about 5 or 10 of them in the inside of the marketplace or inside of the industry or inside of the box. This known as edutainment or education. This known as entertainment. This known as law. You know what I'm saying? This known as labor. We need Malcolm X's in each one of those. Not just a fucking JayZ and that nigga's coming from Rock Nation and he's gonna solve everything by sitting down with the NFL. While Fuller clearly suggested this system consists of patterns of thought, speech, and action, practiced to various degrees by the majority of the world's white people, the only comment on etology he makes is that most white people hate black people. Most white people hate black people. The reasons that most white people hate black people is because whites are not black people. If you know this about white people, you need no little else. If you do not know this about white people, virtually all else you know about them will only confuse you. Let that marinate. Let that golden egg hatch. You know what I'm saying? Just sit on that and let that egg hatch one day to really understand what that man just said. To take Fuller's account a step further, it should be noted that in the majority of instances, any neurotic drive for superiority usually is founded upon a deep and pervading sense of inadequacy and inferiority. It is not true that white people represent, in numerical terms, a very small minority of the world's people, and more profoundly, Is not white itself the very absence of any ability to produce color? I reason then that the quality of whiteness is indeed a genetic inadequacy or a relative genetic deficiency state based upon the genetic inability to produce the skin pigments of melanin, which is responsible for all skin color. The vast majority of the world's people are not so afflicted, which suggests that color is normal for human beings and color absence is abnormal. Additionally, this state of color absence acts always as a genetic recessive to the dominant genetic factor of color production. Color always annihilates the non-color white. Black people possess the greatest color potential, with brown, red, and yellow peoples possessing lesser qualities, respectively. This is the genetic and psychological basis for the Cress theory of color confrontation and racism. The color confrontation theory states that the white or color deficient Europeans responded psychologically with a profound sense of numerical inadequacy and color inferiority in their confrontations with the majority of the world's people, all of whom possess varying degrees of color producing capacity. This psychological response, whether conscious or unconscious, revealed an inadequacy based on the most obvious and fundamental part of their being, their external appearance. As might be anticipated in terms of modern psychological theories, whites defensively developed an uncontrollable sense of hostility and aggression. This attitude has continued to manifest itself throughout history of mass confrontations between whites and people of color. That the initial hostility and aggression came only from whites is recorded in innumerable diaries, journals, and books written by whites. Also, records indicate that only after long periods of great abuse have non-whites responded defensively with any form of counterattack. Thank you, Mansa, for that donation or that gift or that investment. Also, records indicate that only after long periods of great abuse, this perplexing psychological reaction of whites has been directed towards all people with the capacity to produce melanin. However, the most profound aggressions have been directed towards black people who have the greatest color potential and therefore are the most envied and feared in genetic color competition. Paying homage to the historians because they did the heavy lifting. I'm in the gym like this with the 10 pounders acting like the shit is heavy, but I don't need heavy lifting. They did it for me. The experience of numerical inadequacy and genetic color inferiority led whites to implement a number of interesting, although devastating, psychological defense mechanisms. The initial psychological defense maneuver was the repression of the initial painful awareness of inadequacy. This primary ego defense was reinforced by a host of other defense mechanisms. One of the most important of these defense mechanisms was reaction formation, a response that converts at the psychological level something desired and envied but wholly unattainable into something discredited and despised. The whites, desiring to have skin color but unable to attain it, claimed that skin color was disgusting to them and began attributing negative qualities to color, especially to blackness. Interestingly, the term non-white is a double negative resulting in a positive statement. It is perhaps a Freudian slip wherein the use of language ultimately reveals the primary psychological dynamic. Whites' desire to have colored skin can be observed at the very first signs of spring or summer when they begin to strip off their clothes, often permitting their skin to be burnt severely in an attempt to add some color to their pale bodies and rendering themselves vulnerable to skin cancer in the process. Most cosmetics, Fenty, are also an attempt to add color to white skin, right? What's her name? Kylie. Such color in makeup is provided for the white male as well as the female. And finally, untold millions are spent annually on chemicals that are advertised as being able to increase the tanning potentials of whites. The fact that some blacks have attempted to change their color, Sammy Sosa, of their skin to white does not mitigate the forces of this argument, as it can be demonstrated readily that these non-whites are responding to the already established social conditions of white supremacy. Such a process, as seen in blacks and other non-whites, may be described as identification with the oppressor. Another example of this reaction formation defense is the elaboration of the myth of white genetic superiority, which continues to be reinforced assiduously. Acutely aware of their inferior genetic ability to produce skin color, whites built the elaborate myth of white genetic superiority. Furthermore, whites set about the huge task of evolving a social, political, and economic structure that would support the myth of the inferiority of blacks over non-whites. An additional psychological defense maneuver utilized by whites has been that of projection. Feeling extreme hostility and hate towards non-whites, whites began the pattern of stating that non-whites hated them. In many instances, this mechanism has served to mitigate the guilt whites associates occasionally experience for their impulse to aggress against black and other peoples of color. Another, perhaps special, instant of the use of projection is the historic and continuing desire of whites for sexual alliances with non-whites. A desire indulged by white males throughout the world. This deep desire has been projected onto black males and females and is manifest in the notion that people of color have sexual desires for white males and females. The color confrontation theory postulates that whites desires and still do desire sexual alliances with non-whites, both male and female, because it is only through this route that whites can achieve the illusion of being able to produce color. The extreme rage vented against even the idea of sexual alliance between the black male and the white female, which has long been a dominant theme in the white supremacy culture, is viewed by the color confrontation theory as a result of the white male's intense fear of the black male's capacity to fulfill the greatest longing of the white female, that is, of conceiving and birthing a product of color. Okay? Let that marinate. I think we might have to take a smoke break in a minute, but let that marinate. We're going to take a salad break in a minute because I'm hungry. We're going to be doing 5 hours. The bro got to eat. But the fact that, and this is not the same for the white man. Okay? I'm assuming. But what I just read said, the fact that the white female could produce a human being of color out of her womb, out of her yoni. Do they have yonis? Do you call it a yoni? Out of their box. The fact that they could produce something of color coming from a colorless person is a fucking wonder of the world to them. That's magic. You understand? That cures a psychological genetic deficient inferiority complex that these white womb men are suffering. That's why they're in Harlem pushing those baby carriages looking real euphoric, because they got little, you know what I mean? They got Obamas in them carriages. Any of my doulas out there want to testify? You know, Do any of the doulas out there want to testify, or the midwives and whatnot? The level of elation, even the you know, there's a lot of complications from what I'm hearing. So there's a yearning. There's a desire. There's an insatiable desire to produce a child with melanin. You understand? With melanin, with some kind of color, with some kind of soul. There's a desire, and they carry out that desire. That henceforth the Dark Ages, henceforth Europe, as you see now, with the influx of Africans, impregnating a whole lot of European women, with the influx or the browning of America in America, the browning of America, meaning that up and down the 50 some odd states of America, there's a large population of interracial, multiracial, or basically Obamas. Black babies coming out of white wombs. The white babies coming, the mixed children coming out of black wombs. That phenomenon is a newer one than the one that I'm speaking of, about the European woman procreating with the African or the Aboriginal men and producing melanated babies, okay? And still put a nigga on child support. There are other sexual behaviors practiced by some whites that can be illuminated by the color confrontation thesis. For example, in his autobiography, Malcolm X stated that the sexual perversion he was asked to perform most often by white men was for him, as a black male, to have sexual intercourse with white females in their presence while they looked on. This behavioral pattern on the part of white males, instead of being dismissed as a perversion, can be understood when viewed as white males fantasize identification with black males' capacity to give conceptual products of color to white females. Something white females desperately desire, but white males cannot fulfill. Further vivid testimony is given by black males who have engaged in sexual intercourse with white females. These men report that a frequent utterance of white females is that they wish to have black babies. The color confrontation theory also explains why black male testicles were the body parts the white males attacked in most lynchings. The testicles store powerful color-producing genetic material. Likewise, the repeated and consistent focus on the size of black males' penises by both white males and females is viewed by this theory as a displacement of the fundamental concern with the genetic color-producing capacity residing in the testicles. Since the fact of color envy must remain repressed, color desire can never be mentioned, or the entire white psychological structure collapses. Therefore, this is the ISIS papers that I'm reading, family, the Cress theory. Go and get it. Go and Google it. Go and buy it on Amazon. Therefore, attention is displaced to a less threatening object or symbol, the penis. Finally, the degradation of sex in the white supremacy culture allows yet another area of insight into the fundamental psychological dynamics of whites and their self-alienation regarding their physical appearance. At the most primordial level, sex can be viewed as the reproduction of one's own image of self and of kind. According to the color confrontation theory, white supremacy culture degrades the act of sex and the process of sex reproduction, because for whites both are reflective of whiteness and in turn their inability to produce color. Translation: they don't even they shun that shit. They rather do all kind of fisting and all kind of bestiality and dominatrix dressed up what? In all black. Dominatrix, black's latex. Black latex. Right? The dildos that they use, black latex. Okay? Those 18-inch dildos that them white women be on, black latex. Those whips that they use to beat people with, the dominatrix outfits, black latex. This self-deficiency clearly is despised and is stated most explicitly in the religious and moral philosophies of the white supremacy culture. Yet, this manner of degrading the sexual act is not found in non-white cultures. Yet, this manner of degrading the sexual act is not found in non-white cultures. In fact, the very opposite is the case. The act of reproduction is held in the highest esteem as reflected in non-white arts and religious practices. The artistic and religious practice of India and Africa give strong and continuous testimony to this fact. In whites, this initial core of feeling alienation from themselves and from the act that produced their image found subsequent expression in their thought processes, religious philosophies, moral codes, social acts, and the entire social structure. Psychiatrists and other behavioral scientists frequently use the patterns of overt behavior towards others as indications of what is felt fundamentally about the self. If hate and lack of respect are manifested towards others, hate and lack of respect are felt most often at. For example, many white writers in all areas of the world experience and write about their profound sense of self-alienation. Additionally, some of the current political, social, and behavioral activity enacted by whites against the ideology and values of the white social structure, although not spoken of in the terminology used here, can be appreciated at one level as an expression of the same kernel of alienation against whiteness. Thus, the hippies and yippies, by allowing dirt to accumulate on themselves, in one sense, are adding color to their skin. They also, by allowing their head and facial hair to proliferate, cover themselves with the only part of their bodies that have substantive color, their hair. The present frantic attempts made by whites to counter this sense of alienation takes the form of free and open sexual practices and sexual orgies. Such attempts will be unsuccessful because, again, the core problem is a sense of alienation primarily from their own colorlessness, and secondarily from their social practices and structures whites have built around the psychological core over the centuries. Racism, having begun as a form of self-alienation, has evolved into the most highly refined form of alienation. They run around saying aliens a lot and calling people aliens. No, my genius. These are the aliens, and they are members of an alien nation, and their religion is alienation. That's what they practice, and that's what they've perfected, and that is they've weaponized alienation. That is the core of their psychological foundations, is what Dr. Francis Cress Wilson is pointing out. The fact that they are alienated from the human family. They are identified as mankind. They're not even identified as humans. I'm reading from the ISIS papers, the Cress theories. Don't hear ISIS and get scared or report me. All right, this book came out in the 70s before they bastardized and before they criminalized the name ISIS as a terror group. It's really called ISIL, but because they are they deal with word, sound, power, magic, they flip that shit on ISIS. Because when you go in, when you know, you read in this book, they're like, yo, you're reading a terror manual. But the information and the truth, it hurts so much. You know when they say that the truth hurts? Nigga, the truth hurts so much on the ISIS papers that this shit is designated as a weapon of mass destruction. If you were to smack a European with this book, they might turn into Thanos dust. That's how heavy this book is. That's how much truth is in this book, and that's how much this shit hurts. They might turn into Thanos dust. Some of you niggas might bag that dust up and sell it, but that's on you. But I'm telling you, the truth hurts so much that this shit hurts. They don't want you reading this. They don't want you to scientifically evaluate who and what they are, because by doing that you will end the quote unquote misnomer of what is known as white supremacy. Remember the TV show Alienation? We gotta go back and review it because they're telling on themselves, because alienation is their calling card. Alienation. Okay, let's continue. All right. The mass inability of whites to live and attend school in the presence of non-whites is expressed in the patterns of black and white housing and education throughout the country and the world. In terms of the color confrontation thesis, this inability is seen as the apparent psychological discomfort experienced by whites in situations where, in confronting their neighbors of colors, they must face their color inadequacy daily. Remember the story about the melanated sister who was in the dorm room, who was being poisoned by her roommate? Many of you are going back to college. Many of you are going to universities. Many of you are going to bunk and you're going to dorm and you're going to lay up. Don't show none of your white friends my videos, first and foremost. Keep that to yourself. Treat this shit like amputee porn. Like, keep this shit under wraps. Don't be playing it in the cafeteria. Don't try to show off and, you know, hey, there's this good looking guy on YouTube. I don't need that. We don't need to introduce them to anything that we're doing. Facts. It's enough of them already on the guard. I'm Gucci. I'm good with that. I'm okay with it. I don't need to be, you know, weighed out, and I don't need to be measured out by your white friends, because that's just gonna make them speed up the process of finishing you off. All right? It's just gonna make them, because they're gonna figure out that you're about to figure them out, and they're gonna dust you off quicker if you let them know that you're hip to them. The key to this whole thing is about understanding the enemy, decoding the enemy, figuring out who the fuck is around you, so you stop hopping around like Bambi in a room full of wolves and whatnot. Cause them niggas is out here, it's a lot of roadkill, you know what I'm saying? Out here in these streets. Niggas is getting Peter rolled and ran over by these Europeans on all kind of levels. Don't even, you know, like, let's not just point at police brutality. Niggas is getting brutalized at the water cooler. Niggas is getting washed up in Planet Fitness. Niggas, they getting washed up on Tinder. They getting brutalized. Talk about police brutality. What about Tinder brutality? Look at all of this. I'm in New York City. I'm seeing the remnants of Tinder going bad. You got bad shorties. I'm talking about A1s, 5 stars. They in Harlem galloping down the fucking block with Poindexters. With Toby Maguire out this bitch. You know what I'm talking about? With Toby Maguire. So be on. They not showing you their they not showing you who their hitters are. You don't see their shooters. They're not introducing you to their shooters. You don't know. They're not showing off and being like, oh, come and look at 4chan. I want to introduce you to the white shooters. No. They're not doing that. So keep your blackness, mind your black-owned business, and keep your motherfucking teachers to yourself. Stop getting all proud and shit. You know what I mean? You know, talk about the knuckle dragger shit with them. Talk about the mundane. Talk about Young Thug. Nicki Minaj, you know, that shit exists. The nigga, you know, the nigga shit is a buffer. You keep white people in Niggerville. You know what I'm saying? Keep them there. Don't take them across the street to where the scholars are at. Don't take them to the intelligentsia. Don't try to bring them into consciousness. Keep them right there on mumble rap with nigga affairs, because they like shit like that. They'll eat the motherfucking, they'll sip on the tea with you, and they'll talk about knuckle dragger shit all day. They don't need to know nothing else. Okay? All right. If they want to know who Red Pill is, tell them niggas I'm a mumble rapper. And I sell rap jewelry. And you know what I mean? And t-shirts. You know, they don't need to know. They don't need to know nothing else. Because the white fragility, the white inferiority, and when they listen to this information, they know that I know who the fuck they are. They know I don't hate them, because it ain't about hate. I don't have the capacity to hate a goddamn living thing. You know what I mean? I love the concept of who the fuck I am. I love my people. I love the concept of who my people are. You know what I mean? I love the expression. I love the frequency of my folk. So that, you know, the difficulties white have in according non-white social, political, and economic equality within the white supremacy structure stems neither from a moral issue nor from political or economic need, but from the fundamental sense of their own unequal condition in regards to their numerical inadequacy and color deficiency. They can compensate for their color inadequacy only by placing themselves in socially superior positions. The color inadequacy of whiteness necessitates a social structure based on white supremacy. Only tokenism can be tolerated by such a motivational psychological state, wherein the evolution of the myth of the exceptional non-white is used, again, as a defense mechanism. So I'm giving out the groundworks to any group of individuals, any disruptors that are out there, any one of our students, master students or master teachers who want to scientifically and psychologically, you know what I'm talking about, expose these people who are extremely fragile and extremely they're on a tightrope when it comes to the rope that they're walking across. You could shake that rope and you could push them off of that motherfucking ledge, because I promise you, confrontation, intellectually of course, and socially of course, I'm not advocating any kind of physical confrontation, none whatsoever. And for the record, you did not hear about any kind of physical confrontation in any of my speech as a result of these new laws in social media and on the internet. I have to always preface that and make sure that I'm clear in such statement, so I'm not visited by, you know, the men in black one day and they want to put a nigga in Jeff Epstein's cell. You know what I'm talking about? Like, we're not going to allow these lames to try to silence or try to put fear or try to penalize motherfuckers for reading books online. The thrust towards superiority over peoples of color, the drive towards material accumulation, the drive towards a technological culture, and the drive towards power are all cornerstones of the universal white supremacy culture, and they are viewed in terms of the color confrontation thesis as responses to the core psychological sense of inadequacy. This inadequacy is not measured in terms of infant size as compared with that of adult, as postulated by Alfred Adler. Rather, it is an inadequacy rooted in the inability to produce melanin. This genetic state is actually a variant of albinism, meaning albinos. The color confrontation theory further postulates that whites are vulnerable to their sense of numerical inadequacy. This inadequacy is apparent in their drive to divide the vast majority of non-whites into fractional as well as frictional minorities. This is viewed as a fundamental behavior response of whites to their own minority status. The white race has structured and manipulated their own thought processes and conceptual patterns, as well as those of the entire non-white world majority, so that the real numerical minority illusionally feels and represents itself as the world's majority, while the true numerical majority illusionally feels and views itself as the minority. Interestingly, the white collective, whenever discussing the question of color, never discusses any of its own particular ethnic groups as minorities, but constantly focuses on the various ethnic, language, and religious groups of non-white peoples as minorities. Then great efforts are made to initiate conflict between these arbitrary groups. This is one of the key methods by which a minority can remain in power. The divide, frictionalize, and conquer pattern, observable throughout history wherever non-whites are confronted by whites, results primarily from whites' sense of color deficiency and secondarily from their sense of numerical inadequacy. This pattern then is a compensatory adjustment to permit psychological comfort through dominance and control. See diagram 1. Similarly, the present-day frantic focus on birth control for the entire non-white world is another example of white people's conscious or unconscious awareness and of their numerical deficiency status. All right, so look at this pattern, this diagram. The psychogenetic and social dynamic of racism, which is white supremacy. Then you have genetic factor, color inadequacy state, and albinism or variant. Then you have individual and group psychological response, development of psychological defense mechanisms. Then you have compensatory logic system, which is white supremacy. Then you have compensatory behavioral practices, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, war. Then you have white supremacy behavioral system and cultural on a worldwide scale. Then you have systematic oppression, domination, and inferiorization of all people with the capacity to produce significant amounts of melanin, skin pigment, black, brown, red, and yellow peoples of the earth.